al-adhan wal-iqama. We want to talk a little bit about the history and evolution of the adhan and the iqama. And then we want to talk about the rulings of the adhan and the iqama. So let's start with some definitions, some ta'rifat. So the word adhan, it comes from the verb adhana yu'adhinu. Adhana yu'adhinu. And this word adhan is, in the language of the Arabs, is synonymous with the word al-i'lam. Al-i'lam, which means to inform or notify. To inform or notify, and this is how the word has been used by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. He says, and be hereby notified of a declaration of war from Allah and His Messenger, using a form of the verb أَذَّنَ يُؤَذِّنُ, be notified. طيب, another example from Surah At-Tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَذَانُ مِنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ إِلَى النَّاسِ يَوْمَ الْحَجِّ الْأَكْبَرِ. This is an official notification, using another form of the word adhan. This is an official notification from Allah and His Messenger to people on the day of the great pilgrimage. And last but not least, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hajj, He says, وَأَذِّن فِي النَّاسِ بِالْحَجِّ يَأْتُوكَ. He says, O Abraham, notify. Again, using a form of the verb أَذَّنَ يُؤَذِّنُ, notify mankind of the Hajj, they will come to you. طيب, so this is the meaning of the word adhan fi lughat al-Arab. In the language of the Arabs, it means to notify, al-i'lam. In the language of the Sharia, fi lughat al-Shara', the adhan, it means al-i'lam bidukhuli waqt al-salat bi-alfadhin makhsusa. بألفاظ مخصوصة. I'm sorry. It is the notice of the arrival of the time for prayer using specific terms. So it is a way that we notify that the prayer has what? Has come in, and there's specific language that we use or a specific method that we use to do that. The iqama, its ta'rif, its definition in the language of the deen, is al-i'lam bil-qiyam ila as-salat bi-dhikrin makhsus. Bi-dhikrin makhsus. It is the notice of the inauguration of the salah. It's what we use to tell people the prayer is about to commence. Using what? Again, specific terms. Using specific terms. Now, as you all know, the Prophet ﷺ was first taught the salat in Mecca. And they did offer prayer in Mecca. The believers did offer prayer in Mecca. In fact, when the prayer was first legislated and taught to the Prophet, they used to pray 2 times a day. Once fi awwal al-nahar and once fi what? Awwal al-layl. Right? So basically, al-fajr wal-maghrib. They prayed. And they prayed like that. And then obviously the prayer, the Prophet ﷺ was taught when he went to Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, he was taught the prayer to make it how many times a day? 5 times a day. But when the Prophet ﷺ and his companions prayed in Mecca, because most of them had to keep their faith a secret, there was no such thing as what? Al-adhan wal-iqama. There was no i'lam, there was no notification of the timing of prayer, because they would basically be telling on themselves. They would be exposing themselves to persecution. طيب. So when the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina, the question comes, when did the adhan, the iqama, when was it legislated? When did it become a thing, right? So in the hadith of Anas, he mentions, كانت الصلاة إذا حضر على عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان رجل يخرج في الطريق فينادي الصلاة الصلاة فاشتد ذلك على الناس فقالوا لو اتخذنا ناقوسا فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ذلك للنصارى فقال لو اتخذنا بوقا فقال ذلك لليهود فقالوا لو رفعنا نارا فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ذلك للمجوس. So Anas, he said that once they moved to Al-Medina and the Prophet established the Islamic State and they could practice their religion openly, they did have something, they had a very primitive form of the adhan. They had a primitive form. And that was that a man would go out at the time of the prayer into the street and he would say, As-salat, as-salat. Prayer, prayer. And this wasn't an effective method. People wouldn't hear him. Right? People wouldn't hear him. Or people might hear him, but it would be mixed in with other things that were being said, or other sounds that they would hear. Or they wouldn't know that the intention of him saying as-salat, as-salat was that what? The prayer was about to commence. So this wasn't really an effective method. It didn't really work for people. So they started to make suggestions because they were missing the prayer with the Prophet, or missing part of the prayer with the Prophet. So we have this dilemma. Let's come up with a solution. So some of them said, why don't we take a bell? Why don't we get a bell? Right? We get a bell and ding, 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 ding. And when you hear the bell, you come to pray. The Prophet objected. He said, no, we can't do that because that's what the Christians do. So some of them said, what about a buq? What about a horn? Right? Every time the salah comes in, they'll blow on the horn. And people will know it's time for prayer. He said, no, we can't do that because that's what the Jews do. So some of them said, okay, why don't we ignite what? Ignite a big fire. People will see the fire and they'll come for prayer. The Prophet said, we can't do that because what? That's what the Magians do. So they have this dilemma and they're all trying to come up with a solution, and none of these solutions are satisfactory. So Abdullah ibn Zayd, he mentioned that while we're having all these discussions and trying to solve this problem, he said, at night, one night, I was sleeping. Wa alaykum salam. فطاف بي وأنا نائم رجل يحمل ناقوسا. He said, so one of the nights when we were having this discussion, trying to figure out what we're going to do, I was sleeping and I had a dream, and a man appeared to me in a dream, and that man was carrying a bell. فقلت يا فلان أتبيع هذا الناقوس. He said, so and so, will you sell me that bell? And the man said in the dream, he said, وَمَاذَا تَصْنَعُ بِهِ? And he said, well, what will you do with it? He said, وَأُنَادِي لِلصَّلَاةِ. Right? أو نبه الناس بالصلاة. He said, I will let the people know that what? It's time for prayer. He said, أَوَلَا أَدُلُّكَ عَلَى مَا هُوَ خَيْرٌ مِنْ. He said, why don't I show you something which is better than that? And he said, yeah, teach me something better than that. He said, تقول. He said, say. And he taught him alfaz al-adhan. He taught him the words of the adhan. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. In the dream, right? To the end of it. ثم تأخر قليلا فقال وإذا أقمت إلى الصلاة. Then he backed away from him a little bit, took a few steps back and said, and then if you want to indicate that the prayer is about to commence, then you say, and he taught him the words of what? Al-Iqamah. So that morning, Abdullah ibn Zayd, he what? Ran to the Prophet and told him what he saw in the dream. And the Prophet said, إِنَّهَا لَرُؤْيَا حَقٍّ. He said, what you saw is true. It's a true dream. It's a divine inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. This is what God wants us to do. Not to take a bell, not to take a horn, not to ignite a fire, but to what? To say these words for i'lam, للإعلام بدخول الوقت. To let people know that the time for prayer has come. طيب. So he told him, he said, فَقُمْ مَعَ بِلَالٍ فَأَلْقِي إِلَيْهِ مَا قُلْتَ أو مَا رَأَيْتَ. He told him, so now I want you to go and take Bilal and teach him what? What you saw. Teach him what you learned. لِأَنَّهُ أَنْدَى صَوْتًا مِنْكَ. Because what? He has a better voice than you. It'll sound better and it'll reach further if what? If he says it. Y'all see that? And Abdullah ibn Zayd, he didn't say, oh man, it's mine. You see that? He didn't say that. Let's do what's best for what? For the community. Y'all see that? So he told him, hey. So he taught him. He taught Bilal. So then when the time came for the next prayer, Bilal did what? He called. And Umar ibn al-Khattab was in his home at the time when the call was pronounced. And he came rushing out of his home half dressed. He wasn't even fully dressed. He was so excited. And he said, Ya Rasulullah, قَدْ رَأَيْتُ مِثْلَ مَا رَأَى. He said, I saw the same thing that he saw. The same thing occurred to me. And the Prophet said, وَلِلَّهِ الْحَمْدِ. He said, to Allah be the praise. And so this is the history of the adhan. They had a primitive adhan. A man would just go out, salat, salat, salat. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were debating amongst themselves, what should we do? What's the solution? Bell, horn, igniting a fire, and then ultimately, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to Abdullah ibn Zayd and Umar al-Khattab in this dream what we should say, and that is the adhan that we know today. But let's talk a little bit before we go to the related rulings of the adhan. Let's talk a little bit about some of the fawaid from this hadith, or the two hadith, the hadith of Anas and the hadith of Abdullah ibn Zayd. So the first thing we learn from the hadith, or the two hadith, is that we are not allowed as Muslims to imitate the non-Muslims in their rites and rituals. Y'all see that? They were suggesting and proposing to the Prophet ﷺ, the companions, how about we use a bell, the way they use the bell for prayer. The Prophet said, can't do that because what? They do that. We don't do what? We don't do what they do. What did Allah tell the Prophet, and by extension all the believers? قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ وَلَا أَنَا عَابِدٌ مَا عَبَدتُّمْ وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ. I don't worship what you worship, and I don't worship the way you worship. لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. I have my religion, you have yours. We don't follow them in their rites, what? Rites and rituals. Everything we do, we actively seek to have a unique, distinct religious personality, religious identity. The Prophet ﷺ, when he first came to Medina, used to part his hair in a certain way to what? To endear himself to the Jews, because they part their hair their way. Ultimately, he started what? He started parting his hair a different way, the opposite way. They used to wear certain things. He wore it at first, then he stopped wearing anything that they wore. To the point that the Jews said, there's nothing that we do except that he contradicts us in it. If we go left, he goes what? He goes right. And he kept telling his companions all the time, خَالِفُ الْيَهُودَ وَالنَّصَارَى خَالِفُ الْمَجُوسِ خَالِفُ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. He would tell them, be different from the Jews and Christians, be different from the Magians, the fire worshippers, be different from what? From the pagans. Like, number 2 from the fawaid. That whenever there was a dilemma, the companions would present their religious ideas to the Prophet for his what? For his approval. Because at the end of the day, he was ultimately the one who had the authority to say this is acceptable, this is unacceptable. So it's very important for us as Muslims now to always, we have ideas in our head about what we want to do about right and wrong and this and that, especially that which has some relationship to religion. We always take it back to what? The sunnah. Can we do this? Can we not do that? We have to understand that the sunnah is 2 sunnahs. You have a sunnah al-fi'liyah. You have the sunnah of what the Prophet did. You also have something called the sunnah al-tarkiyah. You have the sunnah of what the Prophet abandoned. You guys see that? It's the sunnah of the things he didn't do. There's a famous hadith or famous athar, where after the death of the Prophet, not long after his death, there were some people who gathered in his mosque, and they made circles. And all of them had stones in front of them. And every circle had a leader. And that leader would pick up a stone and say, كبروا مئة كبروا مئة حللوا مئة حملوا. Right? They would do that. And the people in the circle would do what? They would use the stones to what? To count the number. They would use the stones to count the number. So when Ibn Mas'ud came and saw the people doing this, they were doing something, a dhikr, which is legislated, but they were doing it in a way that was unprecedented. So he told them, he said, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? They said, na'uddu dhikrullah. They said, we're just counting dhikrullah. Ibn Mas'ud said, uddu sayyatikum. He said, count your what? Count your sins. He said, إما أنتم على طريقة أفضل من طريقة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أو أنتم فاتحو باب ضلالة. He said, either you people are on a path better than the path of the Messenger of Allah, or you're opening a door to what? To misguidance. Y'all see that? They were doing something that was from Islam, but not the way the Prophet instructed. Y'all see that? And from that he understood that what? You were violating a different sunnah, the sunnah of what? Abandonment. The Prophet could have done it like this, and he didn't. Y'all see that? So we have something called the sunnah of abandonment, or the sunnah, as-sunnah Turkiyah. Number 3. The person who knows something or learns something may not be the best person to present it or perform it. We also learn that. Because who learned the adhan? Abdullah ibn Zayd. But who did the Prophet tell to call the adhan? Bilal, right? And the Prophet said in one of his famous hadith, he said, نَظَرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرَأً سَمِعَ مِنَّا حَدِيثًا فَحَفِظَهُ حَتَّى يُبَلِّغَهُ غَيْرَهُ فَرُبَّ حَامِلِ فِقْهٍ غَيْرُ فَقِيهٍ وَرُبَّ حَامِلِ فِقْهٍ لِمَنْ هُوَ أَفْقَهَ مِنْهُ. He said in one of his hadith, he said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala illuminate the face of an individual who learns something that I said, learns a hadith, and memorizes it, and then goes and what? And teaches it to somebody else. فَرُبَّ حَامِلِ فِقْهٍ, because it's quite possible that somebody who carries knowledge is not what? Doesn't really understand it. And it's quite possible that somebody who carries knowledge will carry knowledge to someone who what? Who understands it better than him. Y'all see that? And so we have to understand that just because we know something doesn't mean we're the best one to what? To deliver it or perform it. But another thing that we see from the two hadith is the clear indication of the legislation of the adhan and the iqamah. If you add to that some of the ayat from the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he alludes to the existence of something called what? The adhan. So for example, he says, وَإِذَا نَادَيْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ اتَّخَذُوهَا هُزُوًا وَلَعِبًا. He says, when you, the believers, call for prayers, the disbelievers make a mockery of it and poke fun of it. That is because they are people with no understanding. So there was something called what? An-nida. There was something called the adhan. There was something, and Allah mentions it what? In the Quran. The beautiful thing about our adhan is that it's not just a means to notify for the prayer. It's not just a form of i'lam, to notify for the prayer. It's also a form of what? Dhikr. It's a remembrance of Allah, a form of dhikr, and a way to get what? Reward from Allah, to worship Allah. And it's also a way to exalt and laud Allah, at-ta'zeem. And that makes it better than what? Than a bell. Better than what? A horn. Better than what? Fire. These are not acts of worship, right? But when you make the adhan, you're actually making dhikr. But not only that, the adhan does something that a bell can't do and a horn can't do. It summarizes what? It summarizes the what? The faith. It summarizes the Islamic faith. So the first word of the adhan is what? Allahu, right? Allahu. Tayyib. That right there is establishing the existence of Allah. See that? Which is the fundamental, the crux of our faith. The belief that what? Allah exists. Allahu Akbar. Establishing the greatness of Allah and His absolute supremacy. Nothing is greater than who? Than Allah. It affirms the complete oneness of Allah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Not only that, by affirming the oneness of Allah, it affirms what? It refutes or repudiates or it rejects the opposite, which is what? Ash-shirk. Y'all see that? ثم بعد ذلك it affirms the Prophet of Muhammad وَأَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّد رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. Then after that, hayya as-salah. It promotes what? The prayer, which is umud ad-din. It is the number one prop of the religion. As the Prophet said in the hadith, he said, الْعَهْدُ الَّذِي بَيْنَ وَبَيْنَهُمَ الصَّلَاةِ فَمَنْ تَرَكَهَا فَقَدْ kafar. He says the covenant between us and them is the prayer. So whoever abandons it has what? Has disbelieved. It promotes what? The most important aspect of the deen. And then last but not least, it reminds the believers where their true success lies. People are in their shops, people are in the marketplace, people are at their businesses, people are out in the world, in the hustle and bustle, and they hear, Hayya al-salat, hayya al-falah. Right? Don't think your success lies in what? In making that transaction. Lies in what? In doing that business. Your true success lies where? In the prayer. Do we need to be reminded of that? Absolutely. Especially in the world that we live in, we forget that sometimes. We think our success lies in what? In the business we do, the work we do. I gotta make this money, right? So I can have the house and have the car and have this and have that. No, the true success lies in what? In worshiping Allah. And the best way you can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what? After a tawheed is what? Is prayer. طيب. Then by that, let's look at let's look at the rulings of this adhan and this iqamah. طيب, the adhan and the iqamah are what we call fard al-kifaya or fard kifaya, which means they're a communal obligation. A communal obligation. What does that mean? It means that the entire Muslim community in any given locality is required to observe the adhan and the iqamah and ensure that they are what? That they're observed. And if a sufficient number of that community's members observe it, the rest are absolved from what? From sin. As long as we have something called the adhan, the iqamah in this masjid 5 times a day, we're all absolved from what? From sin. Like, but if other people do it as well, it will be recommended for them and they'll get a reward for it, but they won't be obligated to do it. Y'all see that? So let's say, for example, we make the adhan here 5 times a day, and there's another masjid down what? Down the road. And generally speaking, they're only there for Maghrib and Isha. Nobody ever goes there any other time, and they never make the adhan. Y'all see that? They are fine, they're not sinful, and the whole community is what? Is covered by what? By the adhan, the iqamah that's given what? In this masjid. Y'all see that? Also, in the case of, let's say, a couple of us, 5, 10 of us get together at Robbie's house. And it's time for what? For Maghrib. Okay? Do we have to make the adhan and the iqamah? If they're making the adhan and the iqamah here, we don't have to, but what? If we do, we get what? A reward. It's recommended, fi haqqina. But it's not what? Required. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Alright? But what if nobody performs it? They don't perform it down there, and we don't perform it here, and nobody performs it at Robbie's house. Then we're all what? We're all sinful. And so if you understand this, you understand that if we're the only masjid that's pretty much open and expecting people what? To pray 5 times a day. And pretty much here, somebody is here for every prayer. Alhamdulillah. Which is a blessing from Allah. So this becomes what? Our responsibility. We're bearing that responsibility in this masjid. And if we understand this, we understand the importance of what? Of what we're doing right now. Studying and reviewing the ahkam of al-adhan wal-iqamah. Because why? If this is our collective responsibility, we all need to know how to do it. Nobody should get up there and we say, hey, can you give the adhan? And he says, I don't know how to do that. We should all know because we're all responsible. Or he shouldn't go up there and then say, Ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. You see that? He shouldn't say that, Muhammadur Rasulullah. That's wrong, isn't it? So he shouldn't go up there and say the wrong things either. We should all know how to say it. Or what to say and say it correctly. Let's look at some of the proofs that the adhan, the iqamah are fard al-kifaya. The first one is the hadith of Abi Qilaba and Malik ibn Huwayrith, who mentioned that they came to visit, they were new Muslims, they came to visit the Prophet ﷺ and learn about Islam. And they stayed for a while, and the Prophet, he noticed that they felt, he could see on their faces that they missed their families. He could see that they were homesick. So he told them, لو رجعتم إلى أهلكم. He said, it's probably best now, after this time that you've spent and the study you've done, for you to go back to your families. And then he started giving them some parting advice. And he told them, for example, he said, صلوا صلاة كذا في حين كذا وكذا. وصلوا صلاة كذا في حين كذا وكذا. He told them, hey, pray this prayer at this time. And pray this prayer at this time. So he was telling them about what? What to look for to determine the times of the prayers. Then he told them, he said, فإذا حضرت الصلاة فليؤذن أحدكم وليؤمكم أكبركم. He said, so when you go back to your families, pray the prayers at this time and pray this prayer at that time. And when the time for prayer comes, one of you must what? One of you must make the adhan. And then one of you, the eldest of you, should lead the prayer. Another hadith of Anas, he mentioned, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان إذا غز بنا قوما لم يكن يغزو بنا حتى يصبح وينظر إليهم فإن سمع أذانا كف عنهم وإن لم يسمع أذانا أغاز عليهم. So he mentioned that when the Prophet ﷺ would carry out some type of military campaign against some people, he would always attack in the morning. And he would wait until what? Until the time of what? Fajr. He would wait till the time of the adhan of Fajr, and he would wait. And he would listen. And if he didn't hear the adhan, they didn't make any adhan, he would do what? He would attack them. But if they made the adhan, he would do what? Yakuf anhum. He wouldn't attack them. Our Sharia does not punish anyone except li tarki wajib or li fi'li muharram. In our religion, nobody gets punished unless they abandon something they're required to do or they do something they're not allowed to do. So the Prophet would never fight people unless they what? Unless they abandon something that they had to do, which means what? It's fard al-kifaya. Tayyib. And the scholars of Islam are unanimously agreed that it's fard al-kifaya, al-adhan and al-iqama. Tayyib. Now, the adhan and the iqama, we said they're communal obligations, and basically they're a requirement for prayer, but not a requirement of the prayer. Fardun lis-salat wa laysa fardan fis-salat. You guys understand the difference with that? They're obligatory for the prayer, but they're not obligatory, they're not a requirement of the prayer. Y'all see that? What does that mean? Suppose I'm at home. I stand up, I don't make the adhan, I don't make the iqamah. I make the niyyah for Salat al-Dhuhr, Allahu Akbar. No adhan, no iqamah. Okay? Is my prayer valid? It's valid. But we come for prayer here in the masjid, and we just decide. Don't ask me why we decide. We decide we're not going to make the adhan, we're not going to make the iqamah. Or, God forbid, the imam forgets. Right? It's time for dhuhr, we rush in, and the imam just goes up there and says what? Allahu Akbar. And people say, wait, we didn't make the adhan, we didn't make, okay. And they just join the imam. Do they have to repeat that prayer if they finish? No. Because the adhan, the iqamah are fardun lis-salat wa laysa fis-salat. There's something that are required for the prayer, but not what? They're not a requirement of the prayer, which means your prayer will still be valid even though you'll be sinful for leaving off the adhan and the iqamah. Tayyib. So your prayer will still be valid. Tayyib. Now, I'm going to close out with this, some exceptions. So the first exception to this rule, the rule that the adhan and the iqamah are what? They're obligatory. The first exception is women. The first exception is who? Women. The adhan and the iqamah are compulsory upon men, but not upon women. To the point that Anas and Ibn Umar, they both said, لَيْسَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ أَذَانٌ وَلَا إِقَامَةٌ. They said there is no adhan or iqamah for women. And scholars are unanimously agreed that women are not required to pronounce the adhan or the iqamah. So women are exception. Type number 2. Another exception is what? Traveling. Another exception is traveling. The adhan and the iqamah are not obligatory upon travelers, even if they travel in a large in a large group. Although it is what? It is recommended. It is recommended that you make the adhan and the iqamah even when you're traveling. And the proof is that the Prophet ﷺ, he never what? He never abandoned the adhan, the iqamah, la safaran wa la hadaran. He never abandoned the adhan, the iqamah, whether he was traveling or he was a resident. And there are narrations where he was traveling and he made the adhan and the iqamah. So for example, in the hadith of Ja'far ibn Muhammad and Abihi, and the Nabiya sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, صلى الظهر والعصر جمعا بعرفة بأذان واحد وإقامتين. The Prophet ﷺ, during his final pilgrimage, he prayed al-Dhuhr and al-Asr bi-Arafah, at Arafah, with one adhan and two iqamas. وصلى المغرب والعشاء بالمزدلفة بأذان واحد وإقامتين. And he prayed, when he moved to Al-Muzdalifah, he prayed Al-Maghrib wal-Isha in Al-Muzdalifah with one adhan and two iqamas. Y'all see that? So what that also teaches us, for example, that when we, sometimes we'll combine for inclement weather. It'll be raining real bad and we'll be here for Maghrib and we're going to combine Maghrib with Isha. So we made the adhan for Maghrib and we made Maghrib. Now we're going to combine Isha. Do we make another adhan? We just make what? One adhan and we make what? Two iqamas. Okay, mumtaz. But another exception is when praying individually. A person praying individually is not required to pronounce the adhan or the iqamah. But doing so is still what? It's recommended and encouraged in his case. And the proof for that is a hadith collected by Abu Dawood and Nasa'i from Uqbah ibn Amr, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, يَعْجَبُ رَبُّكَ مِنْ رَاعِي غَنَمٍ فِي رَأْسِ شَذِيَّةِ الْجَبَلِ يؤذن بالصلاة ويصلي فيقول الله تعالى انظروا إلى عبدي هذا يؤذن ويقيم الصلاة ويخاف مني قد غفرت لعبدي وادخلته الجنة. So he said that the Prophet said, your Lord delights at a shepherd who on the peak of a mountain crag pronounces the call to prayer and praise. A shepherd out with his sheep by himself. On the top of a mountain crag, he just does what? He calls the call to prayer. There's nobody out there but him. And there's nobody he's even what? He's even calling. But he calls. And then he what? He prays. The Prophet said, your Lord delights in that. And not only that, he says that Allah says, look at this servant of mine. He gives the call to prayer and performs the prayer. He is in awe of me. And I have forgiven my servant his sins and have admitted him to paradise. Doesn't each one of us want to be in his own home and make the adhan and make the iqamah and have what? And have this be the result. Allahu Akbar. But from Ba'dadik, we'll mention one last exception, and that's the two what? The two Eids. The two Eids, al-Eidain. The adhan, the iqamah are not legislated they're only legislated for the five daily prayers, which includes al-Jumu'ah. Because al-Jumu'ah takes the place of what? Al-Dhuhr. Muslim has collected on the authority of Jabir ibn Samurah, who said, صليت العيدين أو صليت صلاة العيدين مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم غير مرة ولا مرتين بلا أذان ولا إقامة. He said, I prayed both Eid prayers with the Prophet several times. Not once or twice, but what? Several times. And he never made the adhan or the iqamah. So we don't make the adhan for Salat al-Khusuf, the eclipse prayer. We don't make the adhan, the iqamah for Salat al-Taraweeh. We don't make the adhan, the iqamah for any prayer other than the five daily prayers. And that includes the two Eids. All right? Let me ask you guys a question really quick, Al Ujala. What if you miss a prayer? What if we were all traveling and we spent the night someplace, camping out someplace, and then we woke up and it was duha, right? The sun was brightest, like maybe like 10 o'clock in the morning. We overslept and we missed Fajr. So now we missed the time for Fajr. The window is closed completely. Do we make adhan and iqamah for that prayer, or do we just make the iqamah, or do we just pray? What do you guys think? Is there such a thing as an adhan wal iqamah lis-salawat al-fa'ita, for the prayers that you missed? What do you guys think? Any takers? Just the iqamah, not a bad. Bashir says just the iqamah. Any takers for that? Just the iqamah. Who says adhan iqamah? Who says no adhan, no iqamah? Anybody? Everybody, Shahan. No adhan, no iqamah. Right, so we got one vote for no adhan, no iqamah. Adhan and iqamah. Ahsant, mashallah. And that's right. Because there was an instance where the Prophet ﷺ, he and his companions were actually traveling. They were on an expedition and they overslept for Fajr. And the Prophet ﷺ, when they woke up, they all woke up, as they said, fazi'een. They were all just what? Basically, shaken. So the Prophet ﷺ, he told them, let's move. He wanted to get out of that place, like what that place where shaitan is here, right? So they moved. They moved down, the sun, what? It rose a little higher, and they stopped, and the Prophet ordered Bilal to make the adhan and the iqamah, and they prayed. Tayyib. So even if you miss a prayer, you still make the what? The adhan, the iqamah for that prayer. Okay? Tayyib. And with that, we will stop, because we said we want to stop about 8. It's 8:10. Get you guys home. And next week we'll pick up with the virtues and stipulations. Some of the rules and the virtues, what are the benefits, what are the blessings we get from Allah, the rewards we get from Allah for making the adhan. And also, who should make the adhan? And what state should they be in when they make the adhan? We're going to talk about that. And then the last week, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to talk about how to make the adhan and some common mistakes in the adhan. Any questions, comments, or critiques? Going once, going twice, gone. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, may Allah accept me, Allah accept
I think in that hadith, sorry.
No,
I don't want to be a video.
No, you're off. It's off.
Where Bilal was appointed to wake them up, and they slept off. I think the scholars also use that as evidence for you can pray Rakat al-Fajr بعد صلاة الفجر. Because presently now, one of our scholars in Nigeria, this is exactly where we are in fiqh. Because he discusses it from the Ladai. He tried to say, this guy said, that sheikh is very tall. What Imam Malik said here is, what said here is, the thing that doesn't make sense. Then the Shafi'i said, he has a doctorate degree from Medina.
Really?
Very good. So whenever he's analyzing, he'll tell you that when the scholars say this, that doesn't mean you just swallow it and he tried to tell them why what they say here is faulty. So when he was discussing, so one of the evidences he gave for praying I'm still waiting for
Thank you for your. Yeah, you kind of do look like him today. Now, are you going to shut all this down? Yeah.